morning, everybody. As was mentioned in the opening presentation, I am a stand-in. As such, I've not looked at these for a couple of weeks. So I apologise if this is not as slick as you might hope, but literally I turned up this morning and I'm now presenting. So this is still a flow. The idea behind this flow talk is that there are a lot of people who have used the old Cloudflow Designer and want a little bit of help transitioning from the old to the new. But equally, there are a lot of people who were put off by the old Cloudflow Designer because you had to have prior knowledge to use it. So this presentation is going to, on a side-by-side basis, look at the old interface and the new interface and show you the differences and the similarities between them, with an aim that people who are used to Flow can transition easily, and people who haven't started hopefully won't be as scared to get started with the new Flow Builder. So my name is Claire Jones. I'm one of the leaders of the London admin group, and if you want to say how amazing I am, there's my Twitter handle, CEJHoney. I like all the praise. Anyway, so 2019 has seen the retirement of the old Cloudflow Designer. We've known it's coming for quite a while because it has to use Flash Player at runtime, and Adobe are retiring that next year. So we've welcomed in a new environment. We've got this new Flow Builder, and Salesforce themselves say that this has been built with 4 key design principles in mind, and they are clarity, efficiency, consistency, and beauty. Well, what does that mean for you? Well, it means clean lines, intuitive shapes that make flows easier to read. It means lightning fast performance built with the latest technologies. Standard controls based on the Lightning design system to make everything more efficient. Sorry, I can't read all my notes on there. And also, it just means it's more pretty to look at. Okay, how do you turn it on? Well, keep calm and do nothing. It's already been turned on in the Spring 19 release, so anyone who's gone into Flow since the beginning of February will see this new environment. The good news is your existing flows, which it doesn't really matter whether you've built them in the new Flow Builder or the old Cloudflow Designer, they will open in the new Designer and everything will carry on working the way it did before. If you edit one of your old flows, when it saves as a new version, that will save as a Lightning flow, and you won't be able to open it again in the old editor. But everything carries on working the same way. And for those of you who are still on Classic, this is available to you as well, and it looks and feels exactly the same in both environments. I admit I'm still on Classic, so it's all good. Okay, so we're going to take a side-by-side look at these two user interfaces, and to do that I have to have some sort of a scenario to walk you through. So I've come up with something very silly. Albert, owner of the superhero respite mansion, has noticed that some of his guests seem to be wearing dirty clothing, and on further inquiry he doesn't know, no one knows when they last did any laundry. I told you it's silly. So Albert has built an object called clothing that contains the name of the clothing, the last wash date, and therefore it can work out the time since the clothing was last washed. And what he wants to do is create a flow that pulls all the clothing items in, looks at them all in a loop, puts the dirty ones into a laundry bag, and then updates the last wash date on the record and tells the user what it's done. So that's basically the idea behind the flow that we're building out. So this is our first look at the user interfaces. So the one on the left, this is always going to be the old Flow interface, and on the right we have the new Flow interface. And the thing that you're going to notice immediately is that in the new one we start with a start node. It's not a blank screen anymore. But we're going to start off by looking at the toolboxes, the various elements that we can put on our page. Now, at first glance, you might go, well, these look really similar. And you're correct, they do. We've still got 4 logic options in here, though they've changed some of the terminology. So wait has become pause, but we still have the 4 here. But the data section is our first big change. In the old world, we had record creates and fast creates, and you had to know what the difference between the two was. You had to know that a record create would create 1 record, but a fast create could create many records at the same time. In the new world, we've just got 4 simple data options of create records, update records, get records, and delete records. And then when you select them, the questions asked on the screen will effectively replace what you had to know for the fast creates. The other thing that you can see is that when we get down to this action section, in the new world we have 5, of which one of them is actually a legacy thing, so it's really only 4. Over here, we had a whole load of actions at the bottom. So you can see from my scroll bar that I still had a lot of scrolling down to do. And this used to cover things like send an email, post to chatter. It would be all of your subflows that you could call. And now we just have 4 simple starting points. Okay, so moving on. Okay, the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to create we're going to get some information from our contact record. So in order to send emails to our contact when we've selected their laundry, we want to know their name, we want to know their email address. So we're going to start with a get records, or over here, a fast lookup. Okay, so the initial screen, these look very similar. You have to put in a label, you have to put in an API name of which it auto-populates, and then it gives you the option to put descriptions in, and then you choose the object that you're going to select records from. So in both cases, you can start typing and the list will auto-filter and to find the object that you want. Then we need to set our filter criteria. And in this case, I'm going to feed in the ID of the contact because it's going to be launched from the contact page. And so I need to create a new resource or variable to store that ID. And this is, again, another change. Over here, it immediately asks you, you're going to create a variable, you're going to create a constant, is this going to be a formula? In the new world, it just says new resource. And then once you've selected new resource, you then choose what this is going to be of type. And you'll, so you then choose. Okay, creating the actual resource, these are very similar. You start off again, you put your name in, it puts in an API label for you, you put in your description, you choose what data type it's going to be. So here we had data type, and here we've got data type. These are the same. But you'll notice over here, we've also got this little checkbox that says allow multiple values. So if you were going to do a collection in this particular object, you would tick that. It's not relevant at the moment. You've also got the option to put in a default value. And then when you create these variables, you have to say whether you want them to be able to access them outside of the flow. If you're only going to use them while the flow is running, you don't need to worry about input and output. But if you know that you're feeding something into it, you have to set it as an input value. And if you know that you're going to feed something out of it, so if you're going to update a record, you have to set it as an output value. Now, this used to just say input-output type, and some people might not have realized what that meant. In the new world, they've changed the terminology. It's a bit more user-friendly, and it says available for input, available for output, and they're just little check boxes. Okay, this is my first annoyance with the new system. In the old world, when you've created your variable, it would auto-populate in the box where you started to create it. In the new world, at the moment at least, it doesn't auto-populate. So you then have to type the name of the variable you've just searched to auto-filter to find it again. Now, when, as with most of the products, Salesforce have launched a minimal viable product. So they're probably going to make loads of improvements to this in the near future. This is the state that it's in at the moment. And they're little things to be aware of. But I'm absolutely certain things like this will change. Okay, and then carrying on doing our get records, we then have to create a variable to store the information we're going to get from our contact record. So here again was another bit of confusing terminology, because you'd come in here and you'd go, right, it's telling me I need to create an S-object variable or an S-object collection variable, but what does that mean? What are they? In the new world, it's an awful lot more simple. They're asking guided questions. They're asking, how many records do you want to store? And you say whether you only want the first one or you want all records. Well, if you're only storing the first record, I knew in the old world I wanted an S-object variable, which is a single record. If you're storing multiple, in the new world, you just tick a box that says, I want to store all records. But in the old, you had to know that that meant an S-object collection variable. So they're making it more user-friendly, more intuitive. And then also in the new world, they're asking, where do you want to store these field values? Do you want to store them all together in a record variable, or do you want to store them as separate variables? Now, if you remember back to the toolbar, in the old world, we had all of those record creates and fast creates, record lookups, fast lookups. That's the replacement for that, because a fast lookup in the old world was storing all the values in one record, and now they're just asking us a really simple question. When you do come to create your record variable, in the old world, you've already answered all the questions to do variables are we storing and things like that. In the new world, we've just answered all those little questions. Is this data type field, because when you click on it, it will say variable, constant, formula, you know, all those things that we're used to seeing. But the addition is one in there that says record. So if you know that you're creating a resource to store a record, you would choose record, and then this extra drop down appears that says what object type you're creating it for. And again, you've got your available for input and output and things like that. Okay, and then the final thing on this get record details is we have to say what fields we want to store. And this is exactly the same in the old world. In the new world, you have drop downs, you choose the fields from that record that you want to store. Oops. Okay, so there's our first element on the page. We're basically now going to do exactly the same, but for the clothing items. So clothing is a child of our contact record, and we need to go and get the clothing records, and we need to store them all in a collection together. So in the old world, I did a fast lookup because I want a collection of things. In the new world, I'm just doing a get records. And we've already got our variable for the filter conditions because we want the contact owner of the clothing to be the ID that we created earlier. So that's all very similar. But this is where things start to differ. In the old world, I knew I needed a collection variable because there are multiple items of clothing. Most people don't walk around only wearing one item of clothing and having no spares. So he has multiple items. And over here, this is where those checkboxes come in. It's really simple. It wants you to store all the records. So you just tick those. And then in the new world, again, when you actually start to create that resource to store them all, we tick the box that says allow multiple values. So that's our collection of records. And again, we choose which fields we're going to store. There you go, 2 things on the page. Now, because I wanted to show you a proper example of the new interface, I decided that I was going to add in some user interaction. So I'm going to add a screen element. And I was trying to think to myself, what could I possibly put on this screen element? I did everyone's opinion of what's dirty differs. So perhaps I would ask what I'm calling the whiffy maturity rate. Just how smelly does this clothing have to be in order for me to say it's going in the laundry bag? I did say it was a silly scenario. So I've created a screen element, and these are very similar, but things have moved around the page. So you've still got all your navigation actions. It's just they're in closed up options over here. You can click on the arrow and they open up. But one of the really nice things about the new screen element thing is it actually renders the buttons on the page. So I don't know if any of you have ever got confused. You think you've turned off the previous button, but you're not sure, and the only way to find out is to run your flow or go back into it and find the option where it said turn off the previous button. Now, when you've turned it off, it actually will disappear from the edit screen, so you can immediately see that it's not there. Okay, the first thing I did is I added some display text. I want to say hello to the user who's using it and explain what's going on. And this, again, is another one of those annoying differences. In the old world, when I wanted to format some nice text and I wanted to turn it red and maybe make it italic, change the font type, I could use the rich text editor that was available through this button here. Unfortunately, at the moment in the new world, there is no rich text editor. But you can still format stuff rich text if you know HTML tagging. Now, if you don't know that and you want to make things look really pretty, there are a couple of options. You go back to the old flow builder, you format it the way you want, you hit that button, and then you get the HTML tags, and then you copy and paste it into the new world. It's a bit long-winded. Or someone told me off for saying this the other day. You go on the internet, you find one of those websites that purports to change normal text into HTML. You do exactly the same and copy and paste it in. Personally, that's a bit risky if you don't know what you're doing. What I did is there's a really good website called W3 Schools that teach you HTML tags. I basically went on that website and Googled, how do I make it bold? How do I make it red? And then you just put those tags in. So it's worth learning a little bit of HTML tagging. And also, as you'll see in my preview, it's not pretty to look at, but I promise you when it's on the screen, it does. Okay, the next thing, like I said, I want to get my Wi-Fi maturity rate. So I want to use one of the other field types on the page. In the old world, I had very few options. So I chose a number field, and I just said, let's set my Wi-Fi maturity rate, and it's a boring little field that allows my user to put a number in. But one of the things that you'll see in the new world is we have an awful lot more options of screen components. And I mean, I played with a few of these just to see what they were, and that's what I would highly recommend, is just go and play. But I decided that I was going to use this new element called slider, which is literally that. It's a line like this with a little ball on it that you slide from left to right and the number changes. So with all of these new elements, my one big tip for them is to use the help bubbles. There are certain things in here that you look at and on first glance you're like, well, I don't know what to write in that field. This particular field here that I'm sort of highlighting says slider size. And it just, in the box, when you get it as default, it just says slider size. And you're like, well, what does that mean? If I click in it, is there a drop down? No, there's no drop down, no pick list. You've literally got to know what to write in there. But very helpfully, if you hover on the bubble, it says, write extra large, large, medium, small. So there you go, you know what to write in it. So I highly recommend hovering on the bubbles. They're there for a reason, they're there to help you. The other thing about some of these new elements, in the old world, my little number input field, that's immediately available for me to use later on in the flow. Over here, that's not quite the case. You have to actually scroll down the clues in the name, store output values, and you actually do need to create yourself a new variable to store the value from that slider. And again, using the help bubbles, really useful. The other thing that you can do that I found myself doing when I first played with this is I actually went into the Salesforce help articles and just searched on new flow builder and had a quick read of a load of pages. So normally I don't recommend those pages because you spend more time reading than finding anything useful, but in this case I do. Okay, so there you go, we've got our first elements on the page. I'm just going to take a little sidetrack and we're going to look at the productivity tools around the system. So we're going to watch a little video. So in the old world, to start, you had to used to press that little green button up in the top corner. Now you've got your start element. Connecting the dots, it was just grab the bottom node, grab it along. That is exactly the same in old and new. In the old world, we basically could zoom out, zoom in, out and zoom in, and then you could highlight all of the boxes, grab them and move them around. In the new world, we can do this zoom out and zoom in. The buttons are down the bottom. We've got some extra useful stuff. So we've got this thing called pan mode, which you turn on and then you can move everything around. It's really nice, but you can't click on one of the nodes while you're in that mode. But they've also added this thing called pan on the fly. If you hold the space bar, you can pan on the fly. You've also got a fit to canvas. So when you've done all your flow and you want it to all be on one screen, you click that button and it all fits. There's a couple of things missing from the old world. In the old world at the moment, we had copy and paste. Unfortunately, that's not there at the moment. It might come later. We also had undo and redo. And again, that might come in the future. But was it a forward-looking statement? I don't know it's coming in the future. Okay, moving on. We then need to put a loop element in. So we need to go through all our clothing items. These are, again, very similar. You name your loop. You have to create a variable to store the current record that you're looking at. So we've done that before. We've created our single record thing, and it's exactly the same way. Now, this is, yeah, that's exactly the same. And then you specify the direction for going over the collection in the new world, first item to last or last to first. Here we had to know ascending to descending. And there's our loop element. I know I raced through that, but it really is that simple. Then we need to have a decision element. So the idea is we know how smelly the clothing needs to be. We need a decision as to whether the current item that we're looking at meets those criteria. So here's our decision element. These are the same. There is no difference. Well, apart from one. The really annoying difference that I found, because I'm a flow builder, in the old world, you used to just start typing the name of the field that you wanted to put in your comparison filter, and so I could choose any field on the record and I just start typing it and it would auto filter to it. In the new world, you have to choose the object or the record collection that you want to choose a field from first. So if I just type time in here, nothing would come up, but if I type current item or single item, which is what I think I auto called it, you choose that, and then on the sub menu, you can find the field. So, wrong object, but it also is that little bit longer or changing thought process. So there's my I now want to do an assignment. So there's 2 assignments that I need to do. The whole idea of this is to update the last wash date on our record to say that we have washed it. So one of the updates we need to do, one of the assignments we need to do, is we need to assign today's date to the current object. We need to put that current object in our laundry bag, which is going to be a collection, so that we can then send that to the laundry. We're not actually going to send it to the laundry, but you know. And you have to do that in 2 stages, because if you do it all in one, you'll actually lose the update that says last wash date equals current date. So we do it in 2 stages. So this is the first stage, and I'm finding my field. Again, over here, I tried to just type wash. It didn't work, so I had to find the thing first and then put it in. And then I'm saying that it equals flow current date. So that's my first assignment. Now, you can see that I've joined this up. I've got my yes node, and over here you can see I've got my yes node. Now, one of the things I like about New Flow Builder is it reroutes the lines. You don't know, but here I've actually connected my no back to my loop so that it will go to the next item. But you can't see that because the lines are immediately over each other. In the new world, you've got 2 separate lines. And you can keep moving these nodes around so that you can see all your lines. You know, you just move them wherever you want. Okay, so there's my next assignment. And I've created a new record collection to store my dirty laundry, which is the second option. But I've also created a text string because I'm going to output this information in an email, and I want to be able to store the name of all my items of clothing that have gone in the laundry bag. So I've created a text string and then just added the name of the current item to that text string. And then I've joined it all up. So once we've looped through all our clothing, we've then got to do something with this record collection. We've got a nice record collection called Laundry Bag that has all our dirty laundry in, and the records in that bag all have their last wash date updated, but we need to change the records in Salesforce with this new data. So in order to do that, in the old world, I knew that I wanted a fast update because I've got a collection. I'm going to update all the records in that collection with all the values that I've stored. But I had to know that. In the new world, you just want update records. And it's that simple. It literally says, tell me which collection has the records you're updating. It doesn't ask you what object type. It doesn't ask what you want to do with it. It just says, tell me what you want me to update, and it goes and does. Okay, and then the final thing that I had in that flow design is that I wanted to send an email to the contact to say, these are the items that we've put in the laundry bag today. In the old world, it's really easy. We knew that we wanted to just go and pick this send email node. In the new world, I tried a couple of things, but you know, there's a glaringly obvious action here called email alert. So I thought I'll go and have a look at that. That's your normal workflow email alerts. Don't get fooled. If you want to find an actual send email, you have to go into core actions. And once you're in there, you can type email with the send email option. The single record that I stored from my again, and then the body of the email. I like to use these things called text templates. I thought everyone knew about them, but I've discovered that not everyone does know about them. But effectively, they are what they say they are. They're a text template. They allow you to wrap text or format text in pretty ways. And if you think about it, like when we were looking at the screen element and we had the display text thing and we were putting in HTML tags, but this text template is this side that looks pretty. And it allows you to put stuff on new lines and call variables and what have you. But it gives you more control over what you're sending your user rather than a one-line string of whatever you can put in there. The other advantage of it is a text template does not truncate most of the text so that you can't read it because it expands past the name of past the field. So just okay. So there you go. Also, in mine, added a post to chatter on the contact record because I thought it's good to store it there. And I've, you know, my users come along and set my Wi-Fi maturity rate, but they don't actually know this has succeeded. So I've added in a little success screen just to say, this is what's gone to the laundry. Okay. What comes next? Okay, so now I'll show you what happens when you hit the close button or back button. So in the old world, when you hit the close button, it landed you back on that version of the flows page, or the flow management page, and you have to click back into to then hit the activate button. So it's just an extra click. Okay. Finally, we're going to take a look at the flow running. Okay. So this is my contact page. I've added my flow in a flow lightning screen component. And I've also got here, this is a quick action. I gave a shout out when I did the presentation a couple of weeks. Christine Marshall, Inspire East, did a fantastic talk on putting quick actions on the page with nice little image pictures in and things like that. If you've not seen the presentation, I recommend it. But that's how I've got this here. And we're just how this all runs. So, okay, there's this rating that's actually taken from clothing, where you can see that they're all a little bit smelly. We come over to our flow and we set our Wi-Fi maturity rate by using the slider. We hit next, and then we'll get a little, I know this is a bit small, we get a little message here telling us this is what we've sent to the laundry, and when we click finish, you'll see that the cleanliness rating on all of these has changed to smelling of flowers, and there's our chatter post, and it's all been successful, the flows worked, marvellous. So it really can be that simple. And can I just say, I really like how in Lightning now, when you run a flow and you hit the finish button, the screen immediately refreshes. So in the old days, you have to press F5 multiple times to make it update, and now it just does it for you. Okay. So just a few final notes. The App Exchange has launched a new section called Flow Solutions, which has been launched with a growing collection of partner-built integrations called Flow Actions. I'm just going to read this from the screen. Flow Actions simplify the flow building process by making it easier to create flows that connect with and perform actions on third-party systems without requiring additional integration or code. So this video was just showing you where to go and find it on the App Exchange. And then if you go through, there's all sorts of things in there, like taking credit card payments or getting a weather report and things like that. And then, as with all good bits of the App Exchange, if you scroll down, you'll find a load of things provided by Salesforce Labs. Some of them in there are actually even as simple as different screen elements for the nice screen thing in Flow. But I highly recommend going and having a look if you want to play around with these flows. And then my final comment is, I know there's a lot of people who got very attached to the old Cloud Flow Designer, and there are some people who just aren't ready to switch. And at the moment, that is okay. At the moment, you actually have the option to disable the new Flow Builder, or it's not disable it, it's turn the old one back on. And to do that, you go into Setup to Process Automation Settings, and you scroll down on the Process Automation Settings until you can find Disable the Cloud Flow Designer, and you can untick that box. Now that doesn't remove the new one, but when you go back to the Flow page, you'll then have two new buttons. Flow Designer. For your existing flow, is any flow that's been created or saved in the new version, when you hit Edit, will open in the new version, but any flow that's still was created old version. And you can tell whether it's going to be old or new by the little symbol that's been added next to it. And that is it. Does anyone have any questions? I've stunned you into silence, almost, hoping.
I was just wondering if you were going to use the new one primarily or use the old one, like which one are you feeling like you'll use day to day in your job?
The way I'm doing at the moment is any new flow I'm creating in the new builder. But I have some existing flows that are quite complicated with a lot of assignments that are basically the same thing with a different variable in every time. And when I edit those, I miss the copy and paste option from the old designer. So at the moment, I'm going back to the old designer so that I can copy and paste the bits within the flow. Once they add that in the new designer, I probably will use the new designer because the old designer is going to go away. Someone told me we've got basically till spring next year release to use the old designer. Now, don't quote me on that, but that basically means you've got a year to transition to the new designer. Does anyone else have a question? No. Oh, yeah. I was hoping.
Have they improved the error messaging? Because it was a horrible email before and you had to be quite technical to understand what went wrong.
No, they haven't improved the error messaging, as far as I'm aware. But I don't get errors, so why would I know, right? Because I handle my faults. That's a talk for another day.
Hi, as far as I learned, we still creating the same data model in the background. Doesn't matter what we're using.
Yes.
Do we get access to the data model that we could use it as a reference or directly write the data model, or do we need a user interface? Because if it's just an XML structure, why not using a programmable approach and fire?
You're asking an admin whether they want to write XML statements. I like the new interface.
Let's say for backup purpose,
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that, I'm afraid. Could you do it in the old world?
No, I didn't know.
You don't know. I don't know either. Ask a developer, sorry. Anyone else?
I haven't really gone beyond Process Builder. So for this I was always intrigued to start with Flow. Do you have a suggestion to take the first steps? I mean, obviously you have trailheads. Is there any other way that you would recommend to make your first steps?
What I would say with the new Flow Builder, there are a lot of people writing good blog posts at the moment about the new Flow Builder. Some of them do the comparison, some of them just look at the new Flow Builder. But the other thing I would say, there is nothing wrong with experimenting. You have sandboxes for a reason. So you can go and create a flow and experiment, and if it doesn't work, it doesn't matter. Or if you make it work and then you do something to it and it breaks, it doesn't matter. So I would highly recommend just going and experimenting and being curious. I don't know what this does, so let's give it a go. But the thing that I learned is that you need to have a scenario in your head for the flow that you're building. If you can't draw it on a piece of paper, you can't build it. So start by thinking of something that appeals to you. It doesn't have to be work related. Albert runs a respite care for superheroes, but come up with something that you like and draw it on a piece of paper or write it on a piece of paper what you think these steps might be, and then just try and build it. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. But you can also reach out to the community. They're really good at answering questions and things like that. Anyway, I think we're going to have to wrap it up because we've sort of slightly overrun, but thank you very much.